In November 2005, Microsoft didn't just launch a video game console. They built a multi-billion-dollar digital fortress. The original Xbox had been a commercial triumph for software, but a catastrophic failure for hardware security. Within months of its release, modders broke the console using basic soft mods, modified save files, and crude BIOS soldering. The original machine was essentially a standard x86 PC in a black plastic box, meaning hackers could apply standard debugging techniques directly to the system. Determined never to be humiliated again, Bill Gates' security architects completely redesigned their hardware paradigm for the Xbox 360. They contracted IBM to construct a custom triple-core PowerPC processor, codenamed Xenon, running at 3.2 GHz with 6 hardware threads. They surrounded the silicon with layers of high-grade RSA 2048 encryption and HMAC SHA-1 signature checks. Every single stage of the boot code was cryptographically signed and encrypted. If the system detected even a single altered bit in motherboard memory, it triggered an immediate, unrecoverable hardware shutdown. And to make this defense permanent, Microsoft introduced a physical anti-downgrade mechanism directly inside the silicon, a 768-bit eFuse array. These eFuses were microscopic silicon wires etched inside the processor die, organized across 12 distinct fuse sets. Fuse set 02 held the unique per-console CPU key encrypted at the factory. Fuse sets 07 through 10 acted as a permanent, unalterable lockdown counter. Every time Microsoft pushed a mandatory system update over Xbox Live, the console sent a precise voltage spike through the CPU, permanently blowing a specific pattern of physical fuses. If someone tried to downgrade their software to an older, vulnerable dashboard, the hardware counted the unblown fuses during startup. If the count didn't match the expectation of the software bootloader, the CPU intentionally halted execution forever. Microsoft believed they had built an irreversible, undowngradable digital vault. For 6 years, their fortress held. While the Nintendo Wii collapsed to an SD card save file exploit, and the PlayStation 3 fell to leaked master cryptographic keys, the Xbox 360 was declared virtually unhackable on modern motherboard revisions. Software-wise, Microsoft was right. The math was untouchable. But in building a trap where software couldn't go backward, Microsoft ignored a fundamental rule of computing. Code runs on physical silicon, and physical silicon obeys the laws of electricity. To understand how hackers eventually brought down Microsoft's Silicon Vault, you have to look at what happens during the first few milliseconds after you press the power button on an Xbox 360. The console doesn't simply power on and load its dashboard. It executes a strict 5-stage bootloader chain where each link in the chain acts as a cryptographic guard for the next. Think of the boot sequence as a series of military security checkpoints inside an underground vault. Checkpoint 1 is the first stage bootloader, known as 1BL. This code is 32 kilobytes of read-only mask ROM, burned permanently into the CPU silicon during manufacturing at IBM. You cannot edit it, you cannot flash it, you cannot overwrite it. When power hits the chip, 1BL initializes basic CPU registers, reads the second bootloader, CBA, from motherboard flash memory, and verifies its RSA 2048 signature. If the signature is valid, checkpoint 2 opens. CBA decrypts the next stage, CBB, using RC4 encryption and calculates its Mcache SHA-1 hash. CBB is where the heavy lifting happens. It initializes the system's main RAM memory controller. It checks the eFuse array to ensure the system hasn't been downgraded. Then it verifies the third checkpoint, CD, which initializes the graphics processor, loads the hypervisor, and hands control over to the operating system. The hypervisor is the supreme dictator of the Xbox 360 software environment. It runs in a higher privilege mode than the game kernel, using isolated memory pages that even game code cannot touch. every system call passed to the processor must go through hypervisor inspection. If at any point along this boot chain a single hash fails or a signature differs by 1 byte, the CPU halts execution instantly and drops the console into a fatal hardware error. Mathematically, attempting to brute force a fake RSA 2048 key would take longer than the age of the universe. So, a French security researcher known online as XeLL decided to stop looking at the math. He started looking at the clock cycles. Before XeLL looked toward timing glitches, the hacking community spent years looking for tiny cracks in Microsoft's software armor. In early 2007, legendary security researchers Felix Domke and Michael Steele discovered a critical vulnerability inside kernel 4532, commonly known as the King Kong exploit. The flaw wasn't in the CPU's cryptographic checks, but in how the Xbox 360 hypervisor handled game shaders. By loading a specially modified game disk of Peter Jackson's King Kong, researchers exploited a missing bounds check in the hypervisor's hypercall handler 0x61. By feeding the hypervisor a corrupted pixel shader, hackers triggered a buffer overflow in hypervisor memory, allowing them to execute arbitrary code with full hardware permissions. Microsoft responded with absolute ruthlessness. Within weeks, they pushed mandatory system updates that blew eFuses on millions of consoles, permanently killing kernel 4532 and preventing consoles from ever loading that vulnerable code again. 2 years later, in 2009, modders struck back with the JTAG exploit. Researchers discovered that on older dashboard versions, the system management controller firmware could be manipulated via motherboard I2C lines to force the graphics processing unit to perform a direct memory access write directly into RAM. By injecting code into memory before the hypervisor locked down hardware protections, modders could bypass the bootloader checks entirely. Once again, Microsoft closed the gap. They patched the SMC firmware, altered motherboard trace paths, and blew more eFuses. By the time the sleek Xbox 360 Slim arrived in 2010, the JTAG exploit was dead, and software downgrading was impossible. The community was backed into a corner. Microsoft had eliminated every known software attack vector. The only path left was to strike the physical silicon itself. If you want to attack a system with microsecond precision, you face an immediate problem. How do you know what a CPU is doing when it's running completely blind inside a pitch-black box? XeLL and his collaborator C4Ever knew the PowerPC CPU executed over 3 billion instructions every second. Firing an electrical pulse too early or too late would instantly crash the system or trigger a hard reset. Then, researchers found Microsoft's internal breadcrumb trail, the power-on self-test bus, or post bus. During factory assembly and hardware testing, Microsoft's engineers needed a way to debug broken motherboards coming off the manufacturing line. They built an 8-bit diagnostic bus directly into the CPU. As the bootloader executed each step, the CPU wrote an 8-bit diagnostic byte out to physical test pads exposed on the motherboard surface. Hackers soldered a logic analyzer directly to those exposed test pads. They watched the diagnostic codes flash past in real time as hex values. Code 0x10 meant 1BL execution had begun. Code 0x20 meant CBA was initializing memory. Code D8 meant RC4 decryption was complete. Code DA meant HMAC SHA1 signature verification memory comparison was starting. Microsoft's own manufacturing diagnostics had inadvertently handed hackers an illuminated countdown timer, signaling the exact microsecond the security check was about to execute. When Microsoft realized researchers were using the postbus, they fought back with physical redesigns. On later motherboard revisions, like the Corona boards found in slim consoles, Microsoft completely severed the copper post trace lines beneath the processor, hiding the connections under the CPU's ball grid array package. Modders responded by inventing the postfix adapter, a paper-thin PCB needle tool that slid directly underneath the CPU package. It squeezed a tiny spring-loaded metal needle into the microscopic gap between the motherboard and the processor, touching a single 0.2 millimeter solder ball directly underneath the silicon. No matter where Microsoft hid the hardware connections, hackers found a way to clip onto them. Microsoft's security team had anticipated hardware timing attacks during the original design of the PowerPC processor. To prevent anyone from using clock cycles to predict execution timings, Microsoft integrated a dedicated hardware random number generator directly into the CPU silicon. On every single boot, the generator produced a unique randomized key seed. This seed altered the execution delay of the memory comparison loop inside bootloader CB-B. This meant the hash comparison function executed at a slightly different microsecond every time you powered on the console. A hard-coded delay timer was useless because boot timing fluctuated constantly. But Gleegly found a fatal flaw in how the hardware handled component failure. When researchers analyzed early motherboard revisions, they discovered that if the hardware random number generator line was starved of power or grounded, it didn't halt the console. Instead, the system fell back to a default failsafe mode, a static, predictable stream of zeroed-out seed data. When Microsoft added automated checks in later bootloaders to verify apparent randomness by counting the bit density of the seed, modders bypassed it by feeding pseudo-random ADA streams over the I2C bus, satisfying the randomness test while keeping execution timing totally predictable. The random defense was dead. The target was locked.
To understand why the reset glitch hack works, you have to look down at the level of basic semiconductor physics. Inside modern microprocessors, billions of transistors act as microscopic switches representing binary ones and zeros. To flip a transistor from a 0 state to a 1 state, electrical charge must flow into the transistor's gate capacitor. This physical process takes a specific amount of time, known as propagation delay. For a CPU to calculate math correctly, the voltage level must stabilize before the next clock pulse arrives. This critical window is governed by two rules in chip design: setup time, which is the time a signal must remain stable before the clock pulse hits, and hold time, which is how long it must remain stable after the pulse. If a voltage drop occurs right as a calculation is being saved into a CPU register, the signal fails to reach its required logic threshold before the clock pulse arrives. The flip-flop circuit captures an incomplete voltage level, causing the logic state to drop to a low voltage, a binary 0. This is known as voltage fault injection. You are not deleting code. You are physically starving the CPU of voltage for a fraction of a second, forcing logic gates to output incorrect arithmetic results. Most PopTech summaries claim the reset glitch hack simply made the CPU skip the security check. The reality at the assembly level is far wilder. When the Xbox CPU reaches postcode 0DA, it runs a standard memory comparison loop in PowerPC assembly language, comparing the hash calculated from motherboard memory against the official expected hash. In assembly, this loop executes a subtract instruction followed by an add immediate instruction, an ADDI register command. If the calculated hash matches the expected hash byte for byte, the math outputs a value of 0. If they differ by even a single bit, it outputs a non-zero integer, which triggers an immediate hardware reboot loop. Gleegly realized that a PowerPC CPU running at 3.2 GHz was far too fast to hit with an external pulse. Millions of instructions were passing every millisecond. To slow down time, he pulled an undocumented motherboard debugging line, CPU_PLL_bypass. By asserting this signal right before postcode 0DA, the CPU's internal phase-locked loop clock generator was instantly slowed down by a factor of 128 times. The 3.2 GHz beast dropped to a crawl, running at just 25 MHz. Then, at the exact microsecond the comparison loop ran, an external circuit board sent a precise 100 nanosecond pulse down the CPU reset line.
The pulse was short enough to not actually reset the CPU, but long enough to drop core supply voltage for a split second, causing the ADDI register instruction to misfire inside the execution unit. It didn't skip the code, it corrupted the register arithmetic, setting the comparison-subtraction result directly to 0. The security engine evaluated the 0 output and concluded that the modified unverified code was a 100% perfect match.
Hitting a 100 nanosecond window once in a laboratory setting with high-end oscilloscopes is a scientific achievement. Turning it into a consumer mod that booted reliably in living rooms required hijacking the console's secondary brain, the system management controller. The SMC is an independent 8051-based microcontroller sitting on the Xbox 360 motherboard. It remains powered on even when the main console is turned off, handling power states, thermal fan speeds, and power LED states. Out of the box, the SMC operated at a slow clock frequency of 48 MHz, far too slow to measure nanosecond timing windows accurately. Security researchers reverse-engineered the SMC's encrypted firmware and discovered register D4, the system clock control register. By patching the SMC firmware stored in motherboard flash memory, modders manually altered the multiplier values inside register D4. They overclocked the console's management controller from 48 MHz up to 120 MHz, a 2.5x increase beyond factory specifications. This overclocked subprocessor became an ultra-precise timing scope. It allowed cheap external microcontrollers to count clock cycles with sub-nanosecond accuracy. When you turned on a glitched Xbox 360, the SMC would start a loop, slow down the main CPU clock, pulse the reset line for 100 nanoseconds, monitor the post bus to see if postcode 0DA passed, and if it failed, instantly reset the CPU and try again. If a console took 10 or 20 seconds to boot, you were watching the SMC fire dozens of voltage glitches in real time, hunting for that single nanosecond window where the arithmetic misfired. The instant the corrupted comparison function returned 0, checkpoint 2 passed. But modders didn't boot the official Xbox dashboard. Instead, the modified bootloader launched XeLL, the Xenon Linux loader. XeLL was a bare metal open source bootloader built by the community. It bypassed the Xbox hypervisor entirely, initialized low-level hardware drivers, and executed a direct read of the CPU's internal silicon. For the first time in history, the console's pitch-black security vault was exposed on screen. XeLL read the 768-bit eFuse array directly out of the processor die and displayed the per-console CPU key and DVD key in plain, glowing text across the TV screen. With those keys dumped, the cryptographic protection model dissolved. Modders could now build forged system images, known as freeboot or XBuild NANDs. They took official Microsoft dashboard software, decrypted it using the extracted CPU key, and patched out the internal fuse check routines stored in memory. They preserved the console's unique key vault, kv.bin, which contained encrypted drive pairing data and factory calibration settings, but removed every single eFuse verification check. When the console booted a custom NAND image, the glitched CPU bypassed initial signature verification, loaded the patched kernel, and completely ignored the physical eFuses burned inside the chip. The console could run unsigned Linux, boot homebrew software, run emulator suites, and execute custom game dashboards without Microsoft ever being able to lock it down again. If you appreciate deep-dive forensic breakdowns of console hardware security like this, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here on ArcSys, we analyze the exact engineering mechanics behind computing history. No surface-level summaries, just raw hardware truth. Drop a comment below if you ever soldered an RGH chip back in the day. Now, let's look at the multi-million-dollar underground war that followed.
When Gigi Lee released his research in August 2011, he published it as open source code for the community. What followed was a multi-million-dollar underground industrial war.
Commercial modding groups, most famously Team Executor, manufactured custom-printed circuit boards like the Cool Runner, CR3 Pro, and CR4 XeLL, selling millions of units globally to users who wanted custom dashboards. As Microsoft released new motherboard revisions in an attempt to patch physical trace routes and alter timing loops, Team Executor fought back, writing custom 8051 assembly payloads and building dynamic post-code analyzers into their chips. It was a two-front war. Team Executor raced against Microsoft's hardware engineers to crack new console revisions, while simultaneously obfuscating their own chip firmware to stop clone factories in Asia from copying their designs. Behind the scenes, Microsoft was executing a steady evolution of motherboard silicon to eliminate glitching entirely. They transitioned from the original 90nm Xenon and Zephyr boards to the 65nm Falcon and Jasper motherboards, reducing heat and power consumption while tightening system timing loops. In 2010, Microsoft introduced the Trinity motherboard, combining the CPU and GPU onto a single 45nm system-on-chip called the cGPU. They removed external clock trace lines and integrated memory modules closer to the processor. On later Corona revisions, Microsoft replaced the traditional 16MB SPI NAND flash memory with cheaper 4GB eMMC flash storage chips, requiring modders to engineer custom SD card readers like the Corona 4GB NAND RW tool just to dump and write system memory. Finally, in late 2014, Microsoft released the Winchester motherboard revision. On Winchester boards, Microsoft completely redesigned the internal cGPU silicon packaging. They eliminated the post bus entirely, severed internal trace connections, and integrated the CPU PLL clock lines directly into the silicon substrate, where no physical wire or needle could ever reach. After nearly a decade of constant hardware warfare, Microsoft had finally closed the physical door on the Xbox 360.
Yet for millions of existing Xbox 360 consoles already in circulation, the story was far from over. In late 2021, security researchers 15432 and Octal450 achieved the ultimate engineering plot twist, RGH3. For 10 years, the community assumed that glitching an Xbox 360 required buying $30 commercial CPLD development boards mounted inside the console with complex wiring harnesses and timing chips. Researchers realized that external mod chips were entirely redundant. The Xbox 360 motherboard already contained all the processing power and timing signals needed to glitch itself. By routing the console's own post-bus signal directly into the CPU's I2C control line through two simple resistors, the console could execute the entire glitch routine internally using its own high-speed system clocks. No $30 CPLD chipboards, no external timing controllers, no complex commercial firmware. A decade after Microsoft spent hundreds of millions of dollars building the most sophisticated hardware security system in video game history, their digital fortress was permanently unlocked using two 22-cent resistors and a pair of basic copper wires. The story of the Xbox 360 reset glitch hack remains one of the most important case studies in modern cybersecurity history. It proved that no matter how mathematically perfect your code is, no matter how long your encryption keys are, software never runs in an abstract digital void. Hardware relies on electrical voltage, and electrical voltage can always be manipulated. Microsoft built an anti-downgrade system with eFuses so their security could never go backward. But because they relied on physical silicon fuses to enforce software rules, they had no contingency plan when a 100 nanosecond pulse bypassed the hardware layer entirely. They couldn't unblow those fuses over the internet. The digital wall was unbreakable, so hackers simply reached past the code and manipulated the physical atoms.